this invisible organization that more or less runs the whole thing. If you were going to put a face on it, or an organization, do they hold regular meetings, or how do they operate? They have to do some kind of thing right now.
Very good question he's asking. You know, this group, Magic Control, the Majority Committee, Joint Intelligence Committee is what it is called. That's where magic comes from, M-A-J-I-C. They do have meetings. It's actually transnational. There are people from other countries involved with it, not just U.S. Always has been transnational. The U.S. is key because it's the economic and technological powerhouse, but Great Britain is also very important in all this. And you know, there are various people who have been on the senior committee, such as Admiral Bobby Ray Inman. I know for a fact he was the head of the National Security Agency. Prior to that, he was Deputy Director CIA, and then he became a board member of Science Applications International Corporation. So I know a number of the people. I've met with some of the people who are on this group, including people who are deep cover in the CIA and elsewhere. And former members of Congress and other SAIC executives I've met with. But, you know, it's also very compartmented. So in other words, you may have 200 or 300 people on in this group that are the sort of committee, but even within that, it's a pyramid, and there's compartments within it. Not all of them know everything going on. It's not like it's an all-access pass. And some have gone rogue, splintered off and kind of gone rogue, even within the rogue. Rogues of the rogue, if you get my drift, which is why it's so dangerous. You know, I could draw a whole diagram of it, but you can kind of imagine some of the key people. You know, more recently, General Michael Hayden has been involved with that committee, who had been NSA head and CIA director. So some of these people are known in the public, most aren't. And what I would say is that a lot of the folks who are in the corporate contracting world, what's called WFO, work for others, contracting are key to this. I remember years ago, right before I was going to have the meeting with the Clinton CIA director, I was in Arizona at the Wrigley Mansion, the Wrigley chewing gum people, but it had been bought by Jordy Hormel of the Hormel Meat Company. And there was a man who was a member of this Magic, this MJ12, they used to call it, group. And he asked me to come to the mansion late at night, 10, 11 o'clock at night. I went there, and it was Jordy Hormel was nowhere around. They were just using the facility. And this was a high-tech digital guy, and who actually moves around in the UFO subculture. And we were at this table. It looked like a big conference table, and all these suits were there and people. And they were basically, you know, telling me that I was barking up the wrong tree, meeting with the CIA director. And this man pulled me aside and he said to me, the CIA director and president doesn't know about this, and they're not going to know anything about it. If you want to know about what's really going on, come talk to people like us. And it was a whole room full of folks like that. Spooky. And then it was interesting because, you know, a couple years before, the former head of Army Intelligence had offered me $2 billion if I would stop doing what I was doing, close my operation, and join his group. He had a $2 billion slush fund out of Eastern Europe. And I said, no, thank you. And that was when $1 billion was a lot of money. And when I refused, and he went to my wife, tried to convince my wife that I should do this. But this was 2 years later, and this guy said, you know what? And this is how they operate. We checked you out. You're a doctor. You have really good credit. Take out all the credit cards you want, and you can run all your operations, max them out each month, because my group we run the supercomputers that back up the global financial system, and we'll just zero them out every month. That's what he offered. We'll just zero all your credit cards out every month. I said, well, that's very nice of you, Jim, to offer that, but then you would own me, wouldn't you? Because you'd have a record. And I said, I'm afraid I can't. He says, no, we're just trying to help you out. You see how this works. That was in 1994, 93, and then 94. So they, I've, over the years had multiple of these sort of approaches, which is quite bizarre. And you couldn't make this stuff up. If you put it in a movie, people would think it was fictitious. But it is how they operate. So the corporate and contracting end is really a lot of where the action is with these large corporations and their compartmented groups. And then within certain agencies, there are select folks who are on this committee. So it's not all one thing, but they do have meetings, and it's evolved over the years. My understanding, I was told this some years ago, that about 70% of that group favors what I'm proposing. But the other 30% who are the really violent ones are opposed. And they don't mind killing one of their own, like Bill Colby. Bill Colby was in this group. He defected, but he did it alone. And he was going to make a run at the crown jewel of what they were keeping secret, and that's the energy technologies. And that, as I mentioned, that week they found him floating down the Potomac River. So, and I think that was in 95 or 96, but I think this is why, I've had some very tragic things happen in my life, if you read between the lines, and that's why I decided I had to find other ways of doing this where we don't increase this body count. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, first thing, sorry about my terrible accent.
No, you're fine.
Okay, so this is an important and personal question for you. How the ET choose you and how they decide you are the right person for making contact. And if that happened and they contact you after that, what to do?
She's asking how the ETs choose, not me, but you, a person in general, to make contact. I think that there's a saying that's been, I think, inappropriately translated. Many are called, but few are chosen. I think it really is supposed to say, many are called, but few choose to answer the call. And so I think that there have been knocking on our front door and our back door and our side door for a very long time, these civilizations. What they're waiting for are people who will approach them without fear and prejudice, without violence, who understand a little bit of their reality, who will educate themselves a little bit about what it means to be interstellar. And to be interstellar means to be in an extraordinarily high state of consciousness, personally, but also your technologies are interfacing with consciousness. And so that's why, if you approach it with an ethical and moral intent of a pure heart, peaceful purpose, no fear, no prejudice, but also have prepared yourself for, shall we say, the unusual, even strange or bizarre ways that they may interface with you, so you're not afraid when they do, then they will. But they expect a certain level of you being educated and prepared. And then they will. And I don't think it's, I've always said, I don't think I'm special. I don't think anyone is disabled from being able to make contact. I think it's them willing to go through the process of training and education, but more importantly, what is the purity of your heart and intent? It can't just be because you want to see a UFO and be entertained, like dolphins at SeaWorld. It has to be for a sincere purpose to be a liaison between humanity and their culture. And if there's that purity of intent, then I think you'll be astonished. But there's also the preparation that has to happen. The reason for that is, if you read the last book that we put out, about extraterrestrial, the countdown to transformation, extraterrestrial contact, countdown to transformation. And you read the accounts our senior team has had going around the world. Some of it's very strange stuff. We have a team up in New York where there are these two wonderful ladies, and Diane and her wife, Marilyn, when they first read my book, Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, had their cell phone accessed when, I forget which one, was at the dentist office. And all of a sudden, this sphere appeared on her phone, and the C-SETI tones, those tones we use, started playing over the speaker system of the entire dentist office and over her phone. And this happened multiple times until she came to the Outer Banks of North Carolina and got trained and just had amazing contact. But it was very strange stuff. And in fact, the dentist came out and said, "What's that weird music?" And it sounds like something from outer space. And it was all coming through. I think it was Marilyn's phone. I'm not sure. Or Diane's. It was Diane, yeah. So there's all kinds of ways where they will sort of initiate you and test you to see if you're ready for. Most people live in a very 3D, almost teleologic, very in a box world. But if you're interstellar, you're not living in that world. You're living in the world of higher dimensions, higher consciousness, energy fields that are completely beyond the speed of light. And so when those come into 3D, it can be very unusual. And so preparing yourself for contact involves understanding where mind and consciousness and thought and electromagnetic systems and all this phenomenon come together. There's a nexus where they come together. And that's why the development of higher states of consciousness in the meditative state is the foundation of the whole Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative. It's very controversial amongst the nuts and bolts crowd in the UFO subculture. I said, yes, but you're not dealing with civilizations using a piece of junk like this. They're not communicating using the speed of light. Because if they're from the Andromeda Galaxy, which one of the ETs that came at Joshua Tree told us he was from the Andromeda Galaxy. And we have a photo of it. It's on our website. Go look at it. This is 2.5 million light years from Earth. At the speed of light, it would take 5 million years to get a signal from there to here and back. 5 million years. Homo sapiens haven't been on Earth for 5 million years. So now that means that they're using technologies that are transdimensional, going beyond the speed of light, and which also, it so happens, interface with thought forms, energy fields that are in the realm of the thought. What used to be relegated to the mystics, but now is something we have to accept as the real science of the future. And so this is where the science of consciousness and the science of transdimensional and interstellar technologies are going to have to come together, which is actually my first great love. This is actually what got me involved in all this, because before I was a medical doctor, I'd had a near-death experience, and I had this, even though I was raised an atheist, I had this experience of the unbounded being, and it was beautiful. It was a God consciousness experience, for lack of a better word. And I realized that the mind, the consciousness within every single person is infinite, and everything is folded within it. So I began to learn meditation and became a meditation teacher. I was a meditation teacher before I was an emergency doctor. And what I learned was that this became key, and that's why right after, 6 months after that near-death experience, I had this amazing contact experience that I recount in Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge. But I think that it makes total sense, and it's the sort of thing nobody really wants to talk about in polite circles scientifically, because it sounds too weird. But if it's not a little weird, it's not extraterrestrial. It's probably something from Lockheed. And so educating yourself about the nature of where consciousness and thought and these technologies interface with their technologies. And in 1991, I wrote a paper that's in the first book I wrote, that's called the Comprehensive Assessment of the UFO ETI, Extraterrestrial Intelligence Subject. And in it, I talk about technology-assisted consciousness and consciousness-assisted technologies, where the mind interfaces with these both ways, where the mind can interface with technology, but also where technologies can augment and project thought and awareness more accurately. And that's what these civilizations had. I got a call from a senior aerospace engineer at McDonnell Douglas Aerospace that became part of Boeing Phantom Works. They had their own Phantom Works, became part of Boeing covert programs, but it was still McDonnell Douglas back then. And he said, "How do you know this? This is the most accurate assessment any of us have ever read." And it turns out he had been on all kinds of committees, had known old man McDonald at McDonnell Douglas, and was on the Condon Committee to look into this at the University of Colorado in 1969. But he said that it's going to get you in a lot of trouble because it sounds a little far out there. And then he related me a story. He says, I was researching a case for McDonnell Douglas years ago, and it was in the Baja California in Mexico. And a craft had materialized, and this ET just appeared outside of it. And he had sort of a little black box, rectangular box here at his solar plexus. And the person who had the encounter said that as clear as you would hear words in your ears, this being was communicating with his mind. And he was thinking back, and he knows that this device was receiving it and augmenting it and facilitating it. And it was going back and forth, all through thought. And he said that was a very, very solid case. He interviewed the people directly. And I said, well, that doesn't surprise me. I said, how else are you going to communicate interstellar? You have to go at the speed of thought, not the speed of electromagnetic signals. Now, this, of course, opens you up into the ridicule of the tinfoil hat crowd. But there is a serious science. And by the way, it is why the people at the science director at the CIA and other places know that we're onto the real thing. I had an NSA guy come up to me and said, they're very mad at you because you figured out the Rosetta Stone of contact. And it involves consciousness and thought, transdimensional physics. But it is also the thing that gets you in the most trouble the most quickly in the conventional world. Mainly because the conventional world has been miseducated about science, technology, consciousness, religion, thought, everything. I mean, it's almost like everything you know is wrong. But or partially wrong. But that's where you get the preparation, is really in developing your state of consciousness and having this intent. And then you just go out there and put yourself at service. And if you say, I'll be at service to doing this, almost anything is possible.